Hello there, and welcome. Welcome to this quiet space, this sanctuary reserved just for you, right here at the edge of the waking world. Go ahead and settle in, letting your body grow heavy, feeling the gentle support of the bed beneath you. Allow your head to feel wonderfully weighted against the softness of your pillow, and just let go. There is nothing else you need to do right now. Nowhere else you need to be. Your only task is to listen to the sound of my voice and to breathe. Take a slow, deep breath in, filling your lungs with calm, and as you exhale, release all the thoughts and tensions of the day, letting them drift away like tiny motes of dust in a sunbeam. Feel a wave of relaxation begin at the very tips of your toes. A gentle, warming sensation that softens every muscle it touches. It flows soothingly into your feet, up through your ankles, and into your calves, melting away any tightness. Let it continue its journey upward, into your knees and thighs, a slow, heavy wave of perfect peace. Just allow your breathing to find its own natural, easy rhythm, in and out. Each breath you take guides you deeper and deeper into a state of profound calm. The world outside this moment can wait. All of its demands, its schedules, and its worries have no place here. Here there is only stillness, only peace, and the gentle, unfolding path into your own deepest rest. Our journey tonight begins in the deep, quiet dark, long before the sun has even thought about stirring. It begins not in a grand castle or on a noble quest, but in the heart of a small, sleeping village, nestled in a valley shrouded in mist. We are in a time long past, a time when the rhythm of life was dictated by the seasons and the sun. And within a small wattle and daub hut, a young apprentice baker named Finn is about to wake. The air in the small room is cool and still, carrying the faint, earthy scent of packed dirt floors, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, and the cold ashes in the central hearth. There is no sound, save for the gentle, rhythmic breathing of his family asleep on their straw pallets nearby. But something is beginning to stir outside, the very first, almost imperceptible shift from true night to the promise of dawn. It is in this profound quiet, this deep and peaceful stillness, that our story takes shape, following the humble and incredibly tedious creation of a simple loaf of daily bread. A single, faint sound marks the beginning of the day. It is the distant, lonely crow of a rooster, its call muffled by the thick, damp air of the early morning. For Finn, this is the only signal he needs. He stirs not with a jolt, but with a slow, practiced weariness, his body knowing the routine better than his mind. He sits up from his rough woolen blanket, the straw beneath him rustling softly, a sound like whispering secrets in the dark. The air is cold on his skin, a stark contrast to the fleeting warmth of his dreams. He doesn't light a candle. Tallow is precious, and the faint, silvery light of the waning moon filtering through a small, shuttered opening in the wall is enough. His movements are slow, deliberate, designed not to disturb the sleepers around him. He pulls on a simple linen tunic and rough-spun trousers, the fabric coarse against his skin. Every motion is steeped in a deep, unchanging monotony. A ritual performed every day, day after day, in the same way, in the same cold, quiet darkness. Finn steps outside the hut, his bare feet meeting the cold, damp earth. The ground is soft and yielding, and the morning dew clings to his skin, a gentle, chilling baptism into the new day. He pauses for a moment, breathing in the air. It is thick with the scent of damp soil, of wet leaves in the nearby woods, and the faint, smoky trace of countless hearths that have long since gone cold. The world is painted in shades of gray and deep indigo. The outlines of the other slumbering huts are soft, indistinct shapes, and the great, dark mass of the forest that lines the valley seems to be holding its breath. There is a profound sense of peace in this pre-dawn world, a stillness that sinks right into your bones. It is the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you are the only person awake in the entire world, a silent observer to the slow, gentle turning of the earth. His destination is the village mill, a place of immense importance and endless grinding work. The path to the mill is not a path at all, but a worn track of compacted earth, slick with mud in places. Finn walks it without thinking, his feet knowing every dip, every exposed root, every stone. The journey is short, but in the deep quiet of this hour, it feels like a pilgrimage. The only sounds are the soft padding of his own footsteps on the earth and the gentle, almost silent rustle of leaves in the trees that flank the track, their branches skeletal and stark against the lightening sky. He passes the village well, its wooden winch a dark, silent sentinel. He walks by the small, fenced-off plots where, in the summer, herbs and vegetables grow, but which now lie fallow and sleeping under a thin blanket of frost. Every step takes him further into the heart of the village's daily existence, a world built not on grand events, but on the endless, repetitive cycles of sustenance. The air grows cooler as he nears the stream that powers the mill, and a new sound begins to emerge from the silence, the gentle, constant murmur of moving water. He arrives at the mill. It is a sturdy timber-framed building, looming dark and silent beside the babbling stream. The great wooden wheel, the heart of the entire operation, is still for now, its paddles dripping rhythmically into the water below, each drop a soft, echoing note in the morning's quiet symphony. Plink, plonk, plink. The sound is meditative, a natural clock ticking away the final moments of the night. The miller, a man as old and dusty as the mill itself, is already there, a lantern in his hand, casting a small, warm, flickering pool of golden light. The light catches the texture of the old wood, the deep grooves and notches carved by time and countless hands. It illuminates the fine layer of flour dust that coats every single surface, a pale, soft shroud that muffles the world and softens every edge. The air here smells different. It smells of stone, of damp wood, of the raw, nutty scent of grain, and of the ghosts of millions of loaves of bread. Finn's first task is not to grind, but to carry. Inside the mill, sacks of grain are stacked in the corners, reaching high into the shadowy rafters. They are heavy, cumbersome things, each one a testament to the back-breaking labor of the harvest. He hoists a sack onto his shoulder, the rough burlap scratching against his neck. He can feel the individual grains shifting inside, a dense and heavy weight. The miller watches him with a silent nod, his face a mask of wrinkles in the flickering lamplight. There is no need for words. The routine is as ingrained as the grain itself. Finn carries the sack to the hopper, a large, funnel-shaped wooden basin that sits directly above the massive grinding stones. The effort is immense, his muscles straining in the cold air. He positions the sack over the hopper and, with a final heave, unties the top and lets the grain pour out. The sound of the grain filling the hopper is a wonderful, soothing cascade. It is a dry, rustling waterfall, thousands upon thousands of tiny, hard kernels of rye and wheat tumbling over one. Another is sound that speaks of sustenance of the earth and of the long, slow process that is just beginning. Imagine that sound, a soft, percussive whisper, she filling the quiet space of the mill. Finn watches the grain pile up, a small mountain of potential. This is the very foundation of the village's life, the raw material of their daily existence. But as he looks closer, in the gentle, revealing light of the lantern, he can see more than just grain. He sees tiny specks of dirt, little bits of dried chaff from the threshing floor, the occasional husk of a long-dead insect, and even minuscule pieces of straw. This is the reality of the harvest. There is no pristine, clean flour here. Everything that was in the field, everything that was on the threshing floor, finds its way into the sack. Now the miller moves to the great lever that controls the sluice gate, the mechanism that will unleash the power of the stream and bring the mill to life. With a deep, collective groan of wood against wood, he pushes the lever forward. Outside, the water that was being diverted is now channeled towards the great wheel. There is a moment of groaning protest, the sound of sleeping timber being forced into wakefulness. Then, with a shudder that vibrates through the entire building, the great wheel begins to turn. This slow, rhythmic dripping is replaced by a powerful churning cascade of water, and inside the massive millstones, two huge circular slabs of granite begin their slow, inexorable rotation. The top stone, the runner stone, turns, while the bottom stone, the bedstone, remains fixed. The sound that now fills the mill is one of the most ancient and hypnotic sounds in the world. It is the deep, grating, rumbling sound of stone grinding against stone. It is a sound that is both powerful and monotonous, a low, continuous drone that vibrates in your chest and hums in your bones. Re-rumble, rumble, rind. It is a sound that speaks of immense weight and unstoppable momentum. It is a sound that has no sharp edges, just a deep, continuous rolling vibration. Allow that sound to wash over you. There is nothing to do but listen to that deep, sleepy drone. As the stones turn, the grain in the hopper is slowly, steadily shaken down through a small hole in the center of the top stone, disappearing into the grinding darkness between the two colossal pieces of granite. The work of the stones is relentless. They crush, they pulverize, they shear. The tiny, hard kernels of wheat and rye are obliterated under the immense pressure, their starchy endosperm reduced to a fine powder. But it is not only the grain that is being ground. The millstones themselves are not made of perfectly hard, modern materials. They are made of granite or sandstone, and as they grind against each other, day after day, week after week, they too begin to wear away. Tiny microscopic particles of sand and stone, invisible to the eye, are sheared from the surface of the great stones and mix in with the flour. This is the grit, the inescapable, ever-present grit that will find its way into every single loaf of bread. It is a secret ingredient that no one wants, but everyone must accept. As the flour begins to emerge from the edges of the stones, it looks like a soft, pale, dusty snowfall. It spills out onto the wooden casing that surrounds the stones, a gentle, silent avalanche. Finn's next job is to gather it. Using a simple wooden scraper, he coaxes the freshly ground flour towards a chute, where it falls into an empty burlap sack below. His movements are slow and rhythmic, in time with the deep, droning hum of the mill. Scrape, push, scrape, push. The motion is hypnotic. The air becomes thick with flower dust, a fine pale mist that hangs in the lantern light, making the air sparkle. He breathes it in with every breath. It coats his eyelashes, his hair, his clothes, until he is as pale and dusty as the miller himself. This fine dust, this flowery fog, gets into everything. It settles in the lungs, a constant occupational hazard. But for us listening here, it is just a soft, blurry filter on the world, softening all the edges and making everything feel distant and dreamy. Imagine the feeling of that flower. It is not the silky, uniform powder you might buy in a store today. It is heavier, coarser, with a texture that is both soft and slightly abrasive. If you were to run it through your fingers, you would feel the fine, powdery starch, but you would also feel the tiny, hard specks of bran. And if you were to pay very, very close attention, you might even feel the faintest trace of that stone dust, that microscopic grit. This is whole grain flour in its truest, most unfiltered form. It holds the story of the field and the story of the stone. Finn works in silence, his mind half asleep, lulled by the rhythm of his work and the deep, monotonous song of the grinding stones. There is no thought of the future, no memory of the past. There is only this present moment, the scraping of the wood, the drone of the mill, the soft, endless cascade of flour. This process continues for what feels like an eternity. Sack after sack of grain is hoisted, poured, and ground. The pile of full flour sacks grows steadily, each one warmer than the last, heated by the friction of the grinding stones. The work is demanding, but it is simple. It requires strength, but it does not require thought. It is the perfect kind of work to allow the mind to drift, to float away on the endless, rumbling sound of the mill. Let your own mind drift now. There is no need to follow every detail. Just allow the atmosphere to surround you. The cool, damp air, the single, flickering lantern, the deep, vibrating hum of the stones, the soft, scraping sound of the wooden tool, the gentle scent of raw grain and stone dust. This is a world of textures, of sounds, of deep, unchanging rhythms. A world perfectly designed to lull you into a state of deep and profound relaxation. As the first true light of dawn begins to filter through the cracks in the mill's wooden walls, painting dusty stripes of pale gray light in the thick air, the last sack is filled. The miller, with another groan of protesting wood, pulls the great lever back. The sluice gate closes, and the water is diverted away from the great wheel. The churning cascade outside softens once more to a gentle murmur. The wheel shudders, slows, and with a final sighing groan comes to a stop, and the great, deep, droning sound of the grinding stones winds down, leaving behind a sudden, ringing silence. The silence feels immense, heavy, as if the air itself has grown thick now that it is no longer vibrating. In this new quiet, every small sound is magnified. The drip of water from the paddles of the wheel, clink, plonk, the soft rustle of the flour settling in the sacks, the sound of your own quiet, steady breathing. Finn's work at the mill is done for the morning. He shoulders one of the heavy sacks of the freshly ground, still warm flour. This will be his payment and the raw material for his own day's work at the village bakehouse. The weight is familiar, almost comforting now. He gives a silent nod to the miller, a gesture of thanks and farewell that needs no words, and steps back out into the morning. The world has transformed. The deep indigo has given way, to a soft, pearlescent gray. The mist is beginning to thin, revealing the wet, dark branches of the trees and the shimmering, dew-covered thatch on the roofs of the huts. The air is still cold, but it now carries the promise of a new day, along with the faint, smoky sense of newly kindled fires from the other villagers who are beginning to stir. The walk back to the village bakehouse is a slow, plodding journey under the weight of the flour. Each footstep is deliberate, pressing into the soft earth. He is no longer alone in the world. He sees other figures moving in the dim light. A woman carrying 2 wooden buckets of water from the well, her shoulders stooped. An old man guiding a sleepy-looking cow out towards the common pasture. Their movements are all slow, unhurried, part of the same silent, waking dance. The village is coming to life, but it does so gently, without any noise or rush. It is a slow, organic process, like a flower unfurling its petals. This gentle, unhurried pace of life is deeply soothing. There are no deadlines here beyond the rising of the sun and the setting of it. There is only the task at hand, performed with the same steady patience as the day before and the day before that. The bakehouse, or backstone, is a communal building, little more than a single-roomed hut with a large clay and stone oven built into one wall. This oven is the heart of the village's food life. Very few families had their own private ovens. It was far too dangerous and inefficient. Instead, the entire village relied on this single, shared source of heat. The position of village baker was one of great importance and trust. When Finn arrives, the master baker, a large man named Edric with flour in his eyebrows and in the folds of his brow, is already coaxing the oven to life. The process is slow and requires a deep instinctual knowledge. He isn't using kindling and logs as we might imagine. He is using bundles of dried furs and faggots of wood, fuel that burns incredibly hot and fast. The air inside the bakehouse is thick with the sharp, acrid smoke from the burning furs. It stings the eyes and catches in the back of the throat, but it is a familiar, almost comforting sensation for Finn. Adric moves with a focused intensity, his large frame silhouetted against the bright, hungry mouth of the oven. He feeds the flames with a steady, rhythmic motion, pushing the bundles of dry gorse and sticks deep into the oven belly with a long wooden peel. The sound is a roaring, crackling whoosh, a powerful and living sound that consumes all other noises in the small hut. The heat that pours from the opening is immense, a physical presence that you can feel on your skin from across the room. It creates a shimmering, wavy distortion in the air, making the far wall seem to tremble and dance. This is not the gentle, contained heat of a modern oven. This is a raw, primal force, a domesticated bonfire. Finn sets down his heavy sack of flour in a designated corner, away from the direct heat and any stray sparks. He watches Edric for a moment, mesmerized by the fire. The light from the oven's mouth paints the entire room in flickering shades of orange and yellow, casting long, dancing shadows that writhe and leap up the wattle and daub walls. It is a wild, hypnotic light show, a stark contrast to the gentle, silvery moonlight of the early morning. Adric's goal is not just to heat the oven, but to heat the very stones and clay that form its structure. The idea is to saturate the oven's thermal mass with intense heat, so that it will hold that heat for hours, long after the fire itself has been removed. It is a principle of physics understood not through science, but through generations of accumulated, hard-won experience. While the oven roars and crackles, Finn turns his attention to the first step of his own work. In a cool, dark corner of the hut sits a small, covered ceramic crock. This is, in many ways, the second heart of the bakehouse. It contains the leaven, the precious living culture of wild yeast and bacteria that will give the bread its rise and its flavor. Edric lifts the damp cloth that covers it, and the air is immediately filled with a new smell, sharp, tangy, and distinctly sour. It is the smell of fermentation, the smell of life. This is the village's sourdough starter, a continuous chain linking this day's baking to the last, and the day before that stretching back into memory. It is a living heirloom, carefully tended and fed each day, a portion of today's dough saved to start tomorrow's. There are no convenient packets of yeast here. There is only this ancient, mysterious, and somewhat temperamental pot of bubbling goo. Finn peers inside. The leaven is a pale, beige-colored slurry, full of bubbles, some large, some small. It slowly swells and sinks as if it is breathing, a slow, quiet, living thing. He can see the tiny pockets of gas form rise to the surface and pop, a miniature, silent effervescence. Edric dips a wooden spoon into the crock and pulls out a dollop. It is thick and sticky, stretching in long, elastic strands before plopping back into the pot with a soft, wet thwomp. This starter is the soul of the bread. Its particular blend of wild yeasts, captured from the very air in this room, from the flour, from the hands of the bakers, gives the bread its unique local character. But it also carries with it the potential for flavors that are far more challenging than a modern palate is used to. A deep, sour tang that could sometimes border on the taste of vinegar if the leaven was not perfectly managed. Now Finn moves towards the kneading trough. This is not a bowl, but a huge oblong wooden vessel, almost like a small boat, resting on 4 stout legs. Its interior has been worn smooth and pale by decades of use, scraped and scoured by countless batches of dough. It is a piece of furniture that holds its own history in its very grain. Finn's first action is to pour his sack of freshly ground flour into the trough. The flour cascades out, a soft, pale brown mountain, releasing that warm, nutty, earthy smell of the mill. He spreads it out with his hands, feeling its texture. It is still warm from the grinding, a pleasant, gentle heat. And as his hands move through it, he can feel that texture we spoke of earlier, the softness of the starch, the harder flecks of bran, and the almost imperceptible, sandy quality of the stoned dust. He is not thinking about the grit in his teeth. He is only feeling the substance of his work, the raw material of the day. Next comes the water. He fetches it from a large wooden bucket near the door. The water was drawn from the village well this morning, and it is cold and clear. But it is well water, drawn from the earth, shared by the entire village and all its animals. It is full of minerals, full of life, but it is not pure. It carries its own microscopic history, its own invisible passengers. He pours the water into a depression he has made in the center of the flour mountain. The sound is a soft glug, 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 followed by a hiss as the cool water meets the warm flour. He watches as the water is greedily absorbed, the edges of the flour turning dark and damp, the fine dustiness transforming into a thick, clumpy paste. He adds the leaven next, scraping it from a wooden bowl into the center of the trough, its pale, sticky form a stark contrast to the flour and water. And now the real work begins. The mixing. Finn rolls up the sleeves of his tunic and plunges his hands and forearms into the trough. The initial sensation is a strange mix of temperatures and textures. The warmth of the flour, the cold of the water, the sticky, cool pull of the leaven. It is a messy, chaotic beginning. He begins to work his hands through the mixture, folding, pressing, and turning. His movements are strong and rhythmic, a slow, deliberate dance. The initial phase is all about incorporation, bringing the separate elements together into a single, shaggy mass. The sounds are wet and sticky. Squelch, fold, squish, press, a sloppy, soothing symphony of creation. There is no machine to do this work, only the strength of his own back and arms, a strength built by performing this same task every single day. As he works, the dough begins to change. It transforms from a lumpy, sticky mess into something more cohesive. The gluten in the wheat flour, activated by the water and the kneading, begins to form long, elastic chains. The dough becomes smoother, more resilient. It begins to pull away from the sides of the wooden trough. Finn's movements become more like a true knead, pushing the dough away from him with the heels of his hands, then folding it over, giving it a quarter turn, and pushing again. Push, fold, turn. Push, fold, turn. The rhythm is deeply hypnotic, a slow, meditative rocking motion. His whole body is involved, leaning his weight into each push, using the strength of his shoulders and his core. Let your own body feel that gentle, rocking rhythm. There is nothing to do but flow with it, letting the steady, repetitive motion soothe your mind. The air in the bakehouse is still thick with smoke, but now it is mingling with the developing scent of the dough, the raw, weedy smell of the flour, the sour tang of the leaven, and the clean mineral scent of the water. It is a complex and deeply earthy perfume. As Finn kneads, his focus is absolute. He is not thinking, he is feeling. He feels the dough's resistance, its growing elasticity, its temperature. He knows by touch alone when it has been worked enough. But this process is long. It is not a quick 5-minute knead. This can take a huge amount of time, ensuring the tough, low-protein flour of the era is worked enough to develop any kind of structure at all. It is a marathon, not a sprint, and its slowness is a kind of calming medicine. Meanwhile, Edric has judged the oven to be hot enough. The inside of the domed chamber is no longer black, but glowing a bright, incandescent white yellow. The very stones are radiating a ferocious heat. The fire has consumed all the fuel, leaving behind a thick bed of glowing red and orange embers. Now comes a crucial and seemingly counterintuitive step. Using a long-handled metal rake called a scuffle, Edric begins to pull all of the burning embers and ashes out of the oven. He rakes them carefully from the hot stone floor, letting them fall into a stone pit dug into the floor beside the oven, where they can cool safely. The oven must be completely clear of the fire that heated it. The bread will not be baked by a live fire, but by the residual, radiant heat held captive within the oven's thick clay and stone walls. Once the embers are removed, the oven floor is still covered in a fine layer of gray ash. This must be cleaned. Edric takes a tool called a swab, which is essentially a large bundle of damp rags tied to the end of a long pole. He dips the rags into the bucket of well water and then pushes the steaming, sizzling swab into the oven. He mops the oven floor, the water hissing and instantly turning to steam as it hits the blisteringly hot stones. This action cleans away the ash and also introduces a little moisture into the oven, creating a steamy environment that will help the bread develop a wonderful crisp crust. The sound of the sizzle and the sight of the billowing steam clouds pouring from the oven as mouth is another part of this sensory, elemental process. It is a cleansing, a final preparation for the sacred act of baking. Now the oven is ready, a dark, empty, cavernous space, radiating an invisible but immense heat. Edric covers the oven's opening with a heavy plug made of stone or damp wood to trap the heat inside while the dough completes its long, slow fermentation. The energy of the roaring fire has been transferred into the quiet, waiting stillness of the oven, and for a while the bakehouse becomes a quieter place. The roaring of the fire is gone, replaced by the rhythmic, soft, thudding sound of Finn kneading the dough and the gentle crackle of the cooling embers in the ash pit. It is a time of waiting, a time of slow transformation. And waiting, as we know, is one of the most powerful invitations to sleep. There is nothing to do but wait. Finn continues his kneading. He works in silence, his breathing deep and steady, his movements economical and practiced. Let's imagine the tiny details of this moment. A stray beam of morning light now cuts through the bakehouse, illuminating the thick, hazy air. In this beam of light, you can see a universe of tiny floating particles. There are motes of dust from the rafters, fine particles of flour from Finn's work, and perhaps even a tiny drifting piece of chaff. It is easy to see how these tiny airborne bits of the world could settle on the surface of the sticky dough in the trough. It is an unavoidable part of the process. Another secret ingredient, the concept of sterile food preparation, is centuries away. Here, food is intimately connected to the environment it is made in, for better or for worse. After a long period of intense kneading, Finn finally senses that the dough is ready for its first rest. It has transformed into a smooth, elastic, and slightly tacky ball. It is alive, full of potential energy. He gathers a huge mass of dough into the center of the trough and covers it with a large, coarse linen cloth, the same kind he might use for a blanket. The cloth will protect it from the worst of the dust and prevent its surface from drying out as it begins the slow, magical process of fermentation. Now, another period of waiting begins. The wild yeasts from the leaven, now happily mixed with a feast of fresh flour and water, will begin their work. They will consume the simple sugars in the flour and release tiny bubbles of carbon dioxide gas. It is these bubbles that will, over many hours, slowly inflate the dough, making it rise. There is nothing to do now but let time and biology do their work. Finn finds a small wooden stool in the corner, sits down, and leans his back against the rough wattle and daub wall. Edric does the same. The bakehouse enters a state of quiet contemplation. The only sounds are the crackling embers and the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing. This is a perfect moment to let your mind drift. Imagine sitting in that warm, dim, quiet room. The air smells of smoke and raw dough and damp earth. You can feel the gentle, radiant heat from the nearby oven, a comforting warmth that soaks into your muscles. There are no distractions, no conversations, just the quiet companionship of shared work and patient waiting. It is a moment of deep, profound peace, a pause in the endless cycle of labor. This first rise or bulk fermentation is a long and slow process especially in the cool environment of the bakehouse. It could take hours. During this time, the dough must be tended to. Periodically, Finn will return to the trough, uncover the dough, and perform a series of folds. He doesn't knead it again. Instead, he reaches down, grabs a section of the dough, gently stretches it upwards, and folds it over the top of the main mass. He does this from 4 sides: north, south, east, and west. This process of stretching and folding helps to develop the gluten structure even further, equalizes the dough's temperature, and redistributes the yeast, giving them new food to consume. Each fold is a gentle, deliberate act, a quiet conversation with the dough. Stretch and fold, stretch and fold. The dough sighs softly as the air is pressed out of it, a gentle, wheezing sound, before it is covered again to continue its slow, silent expansion. Let's focus on that sound, the soft, sighing sound of the dough being folded. It's a sound of release, of gentle transformation. Oosh. Imagine the feeling of the dough, now warmer and full of air, like a soft, living pillow. It is smooth, pliant, and yielding. The work is no longer about brute force, but about gentle guidance encouraging the dough to become what it is meant to be. This slow, gentle, repetitive rhythm of folding the dough every so often is another deeply hypnotic ritual. It breaks up the long wait into smaller, more manageable, and incredibly sleepy intervals. There is the long, quiet pause, followed by the gentle, rhythmic activity of the fold, and then back to the long, quiet pause. It is a rhythm that naturally encourages the mind to switch off and drift. During one of these long pauses, let's consider the flour again. We know it contains grit from the millstones, but what else might be in it? The grain, stored for months in the village granary, was a tempting target for rats and mice. It was also home to weevils and other insects. Despite the best efforts to sieve and clean the grain, it was impossible to remove everything. And so the flour contained not just stone, but also an unavoidable microscopic amount of protein from these other sources. This is not something anyone worried about. It was simply a part of life, a part of the bread. But for us, drifting here in our comfortable beds, it's another reminder of how different this world was, how much closer to the raw, unfiltered earth. And this reminder, this contrast, can allow us to sink even deeper into our own sense of comfort and security, letting go of all our modern worries. Another danger lurking in the grain, especially the rye, was a fungus called ergot. It grew on the ears of rye, looking like small, dark, purplish-black growths, often mistaken for just another part of the plant. When this infected rye was harvested and ground along with the healthy grain, the ergot fungus got into the flour. Consuming this fungus could lead to a dreadful condition known as St. Anthony's fire, causing hallucinations, convulsions, and a terrible burning sensation in the limbs. The bakers of this time had no knowledge of microbiology, but they had experience. They knew that certain batches of flour from certain fields in certain wet years were bad. They might have attributed it to witchcraft or a curse, never suspecting the tiny, dark speckles in the flour. Thinking of this now is not meant to alarm you, but to simply add another layer to this sleepy historical tapestry. It is just a fact, a piece of the story, as distant and harmless to you now as a character in a dream. It is just another thread in the wonderfully dull and fascinating reality of medieval bread. Another reason to feel safe and peaceful right where you are. The sun is higher in the sky now, and the bakehouse is filled with a brighter, though still hazy, light. The day is warming up, and the dough in the trough is rising more quickly. It has doubled in size, a great pillowy dome of potential, its surface smooth and taut. Edric and Finn know that it is nearly time to divide and shape the loaves. The quiet, contemplative period is coming to an end, soon to be replaced by another phase of gentle, rhythmic work. The air is warm and sleepy. The scent of fermentation is stronger now, a sweet and sour perfume that hangs heavy in the air. The crackling of the embers is soft to a barely audible hiss. It is a moment of perfect, sleepy stillness, just before the next stage of the journey begins. A moment for you to sink just a little bit deeper, letting the weight of your body feel wonderfully heavy and relaxed as we wait for the dough to be ready. Edric finally nods, a slow, satisfied motion. The time for waiting is over. He moves towards the trough, his presence shifting the energy in the room from passive to active, yet without any sense of hurry. With practiced ease, he sprinkles a generous layer of the coarse flour onto a large, flat wooden board that serves as his workbench. Then, using a wooden scraper and his own strong hands, he coaxes the great, living mass of dough out of the trough. It releases from the wood with a soft, reluctant sigh, a sound of gentle surrender, and lands on the floured board with a deep, pillowy humph. The dough is a beautiful thing, alive and airy, pockmarked with bubbles of all sizes, a testament to the quiet, invisible work of the yeast. The task now is to divide this single entity into the many individual loaves that will feed the village families. Edric uses a simple, flat-edged piece of metal, a scraper, for this job. He doesn't use a scale. His hands and his eyes, trained by thousands of baking days, are his only measuring tools. He presses the sharp edge of the scraper into the dough, and it sinks through the airy structure with a satisfying, whispery shing-ink. With a quick, decisive motion, he cuts a section away from the main mass. He lifts the piece of dough. It is heavy and soft, stretching slightly under its own weight. He tosses it from hand to hand for a moment, feeling its heft, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he adds a small piece or removes one until he is satisfied that it is the correct weight. This is the artistry of the baker, a deep, intuitive feel for his medium. Finn's job is to assist in the shaping. As Edric portions each piece of dough, he passes it to Finn. The young apprentice takes the seemingly formless lump and begins to give it structure. His hands are floured, and he works with a gentle, rhythmic precision. He flattens the dough slightly, degassing it with a soft press of his palms. Then he begins to fold it, much like he folded the main mass earlier, but with more finesse. He folds the top edge down to the middle, presses it firmly, then folds the bottom edge up to meet it, creating a rough cylinder. He is creating tension, teaching the dough to hold a shape, encouraging the gluten strands to form a tight-knit skin on the outside of the loaf that will trap the gases during the final rise and in the heat of the oven. The shaping continues with a rolling and tucking motion. He rolls the cylinder of dough on the floured board, his cupped hands guiding it, tucking the seam underneath with each roll. Roll, tuck, roll, tuck. The rhythm is gentle and repetitive, a soft, whispery sound of dough moving against the wooden board. He is not forcing it, he is persuading it. He is creating a beautiful, taut surface on the top of the loaf while sealing the seam tightly on the bottom. The finished shape is not a perfect, uniform oval, but a rustic, slightly uneven loaf, full of character. Each one is unique, a small, handcrafted sculpture. Allow yourself to be mesmerized by this gentle, creative process. The soft sounds, the repetitive motions, the transformation of a shapeless lump into a loaf full of promise. It's a quiet, peaceful, and deeply satisfying thing to observe. As each loaf is shaped, it needs a place to rest for its final rise or proof. This is where the bannetons come in. These are not metal tins, but simple baskets woven from wicker or willow reeds. Their primary purpose is to support the soft dough as it proofs, so it rises upwards rather than spreading outwards. Finn prepares them by taking a handful of the coarse flour mixture of wheat and rye and dusting the inside of the cloth-lined baskets with a thick, generous layer. This flour is crucial. It prevents the sticky, wet dough from adhering to the cloth, ensuring it will release cleanly when it's time to bake. He tilts and taps the basket, making sure every part of the cloth liner is coated in a soft, white, dusty film. With great care, Finn takes each shaped loaf and places it gently into a prepared basket, seam side up. The smooth, taut surface of the loaf goes face down into the basket. This seems backwards, but it means that when the loaf is tipped out for baking, the beautiful, smooth surface will be on top, and the seam will be on the bottom, securely holding the loaf together. He handles the dough with a reverence and gentleness that speaks of his respect for the process. He places them in rows on a long wooden shelf, a quiet army of waiting loaves, each one nestled in its own flowery cradle. Once again, a period of quiet waiting descends upon the bakehouse. The work is done for now. The dough must be given its final chance to grow, to gather its strength for the trial of the oven. This final proof is shorter than the first rise. The yeast is now incredibly active, and the bakehouse is warm and humid. The loaves begin to swell visibly in their baskets, puffing up like soft pillows, filling the weave of the cloth. During this time, the life of the village begins to intersect with the life of the bakehouse. The door opens, and a woman enters, carrying a flat, earthenware dish. Inside is a joint of meat, seasoned with herbs from her garden, ready to be cooked in the residual heat of the great oven after the bread is done. She exchanges a few quiet words with Edric, her voice a low, pleasant murmur, and places her dish on a stone slab near the hearth. This was another vital function of the communal oven. It was the village's cooking center, a place to roast meat or bake savory pies that would be impossible to cook on an open hearth. The sounds of the village drift in through the open door, the distant clucking of hens, the lowing of a cow, the faint, rhythmic thump, thump, thump of someone chopping wood. These sounds are not jarring. They are part of the gentle, ambient symphony of the day. They paint a picture of a world moving at a human pace, a pace dictated by necessity and the natural rhythms of life. These gentle, mundane sounds are deeply reassuring. They speak of community, of continuity, of a world that is stable and predictable. Allow these distant, gentle sounds to be a backdrop to your own relaxation, a soft soundscape that signals that all is well, that the world is peacefully going about its business, and that you are safe to let go and drift. Edric watches the proving loaves with a hawk's eye. He knows that this final stage is critical. If the dough overproofs, it will collapse in the oven, the gluten structure too weak to hold the gas. If it is underproofed, it will burst open in a violent, uncontrolled way, resulting in a dense, heavy loaf. He relies on his senses. He looks at the volume of the dough, how it has filled the basket, and then he uses the finger dent test. He gently presses a floured fingertip into the surface of one of the loaves. He observes how quickly the indentation springs back. If it springs back instantly, it needs more time. If it remains as a permanent dent, it has gone too far. He is looking for that perfect moment when the indentation springs back slowly, leaving just a faint trace. That is the moment of peak readiness. When he judges the moment is right, the final swift phase of preparation begins. The oven plug is removed, and a wave of dry, intense heat washes into the room, smelling of hot stone and baked earth. The temperature inside is still incredibly high, a silent, invisible power. Edric readies his peel, the long-handled wooden paddle used to load the bread into the oven. Finn's job is to turn the loaves out of their baskets and onto the peel. He takes a basket, places the flat blade of the peel over it, and with a quick, fluid flip, inverts them both. The loaf drops from its cloth-lined nest onto the peel with a soft thud, landing perfectly, seam side down. The revealed surface of the loaf is beautiful. It is covered in a fine, powdery layer of the flour from the banneton, and sometimes the pattern of the woven basket or the texture of the cloth is imprinted on its surface. It is a perfect, pale, and fragile-looking thing. But before it can face the fire, there is one final touch. Edric takes a small, incredibly sharp knife. With a swift, confident motion, he makes a series of slashes across the top of the loaf. Slit, slit, slit. The sound is sharp but soft, a whisper of a cut. The blade parts the taut skin of the dough, revealing the airy, web-like structure beneath. This is scoring. It is not for decoration, although it is beautiful. It is a deeply practical measure, creating a weak point in the crust to control how the loaf expands in the oven, preventing it from rupturing in a random, chaotic way. Each baker had his own signature score, a simple mark that identified his bread from all the others. Now it is time, the moment of truth. Edric lifts the peel, which now holds several scored loaves, and moves to the mouth of the oven. The radiant heat is so intense that he has to shield his face. He positions the peel deep inside the dark, glowing chamber. Then, with a sharp, masterful jerk, he pulls the peel back, leaving the loaves sitting directly on the hot stone floor of the oven. He repeats this process with a quiet, focused efficiency, filling the oven with pale, doughy forms. The instant the cool, moist dough hits the hot stone, there is a faint hissing sound, and the bottom of the loaf begins to cook immediately, a process known as oven spring. The yeast, in a final, frantic burst of activity before the heat kills it, releases a massive amount of gas, causing the loaf to expand dramatically in the first few minutes of baking. Once the oven is full, Edric quickly seals the opening again with a heavy stone plug, trapping the loaves in the intense, radiant, steam-filled darkness. And now there is nothing more to do. The work of the bakers is over. The fate of the bread is now in the hands of the oven, in the stored heat of the stones, in the chemistry of heat and starch and protein. Another period of waiting begins, but this one is different. It is filled with a new scent. The raw, sour smell of fermentation begins to be replaced by something else entirely. It starts as a faint, toasty aroma, the smell of starch beginning to caramelize. Then slowly it blossoms into the rich, warm, comforting, and universally beloved smell of baking bread. Allow that scent to fill your imagination. It is one of the most reassuring and peaceful scents in the human experience. It speaks of home, of nourishment, of community, of work completed. It winds its way through the smoky air of the bakehouse, a warm and golden promise. Let yourself breathe in that imaginary scent and let it relax you from the inside out. There are no sharp edges to this smell. It is soft, it is round, it is deeply and profoundly comforting. Finn and Edric sit again on their stools, their work done. They are silent, listening. They are listening for the subtle sounds of the bake, and smelling the air, judging the progress of the loaves by scent alone. Inside that dark, hot chamber, a magical transformation is occurring. The wet, heavy dough is drying out. A crust is forming, hardening, and beginning to brown. The sugars on the surface are caramelizing and undergoing the Maillard reaction, creating hundreds of new flavor and aroma compounds. The grit from the millstones is still there, baked into the very fabric of the bread. The memory of the field, the dust of the threshing floor, the invisible life from the well water, it is all still there. But it is being transformed by the heat, sealed within a hard, protective crust. The bread is becoming itself. It is a process of alchemy, turning the humble, dirty ingredients of the earth into something that can sustain life. The waiting is the hardest part, and also the most peaceful. The bakehouse is quiet again, save for the crackling of the embers and the murmur of villagers who might now be gathered outside, drawn by the incredible smell. The bakers do not talk, they are listening. They have an internal clock, honed by years of practice, that tells them how long the bread needs. There is no timer to set, no glass window to peer through. There is only experience, instinct, and the messages carried on the warm, fragrant air. This deep, trusting reliance on instinct over technology is, in itself, a deeply calming concept. It speaks of a connection to the world that is direct, sensory, and profound. A connection that we can borrow just for a little while as we lie here, letting go of our own complex world and sinking into the simple, sleepy rhythm of the past. Let the scent of the baking bread be your final guide into a deep, warm, peaceful state of rest. There is nothing left to do. The work is done. It is time to rest. Edric stands motionless, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to a distant song. He is smelling the air, letting the fragrant steam tell him its secrets. He can detect the subtle shift from the sweet scent of baking to the sharper, more carbonized aroma that signals the crust is darkening, hardening, reaching the peak of its strength and flavor. There is a look of deep, focused calm on his face. After a few more moments of this silent communion, he gives a short, sharp nod. It is time. The bread is ready. He moves towards the oven, and the quiet anticipation in the room becomes a tangible thing. All the hours of work, from the pre-dawn trip to the mill to the patient folding of the dough, have led to this single, climactic moment. With a grunt of effort, he pulls the heavy stone plug away from the oven's mouth. A billow of superheated air, thick with the most incredible, intoxicating aroma, erupts into the room. It is a wave of pure, unadulterated baked bread scent, a smell so rich and complex it seems you can almost taste it. It is nutty, toasty, deeply earthy, and sweet all at once. It is the scent of victory over hunger, the perfume of civilization itself. This glorious cloud of fragrance momentarily overwhelms everything, a warm, invisible blanket that promises comfort and satisfaction. For a moment, the bakehouse is a sacred place filled with the spirit of the grain, transformed by fire. Peering into the darkness, the loaves are revealed. They are no longer pale, soft, and fragile. They have been utterly transformed by their trial by fire. They are now magnificent, rustic creatures, swollen to their full size, with deep, craggy fissures where Edric's knife had scored them. Their crusts are a beautiful tapestry of colors, from golden tan to a deep, dark, almost black mahogany on the highest ridges. They are no longer silent. The moment the cooler air of the bakehouse hits their blisteringly hot surfaces, they begin to sing. It is a quiet, magical sound, a chorus of tiny, sharp crackles and pops. Tick, crackle, pop. Tick, tick, crackle. It is the sound of the crust contracting as it cools. A delicate, percussive music that is the loaf's own quiet announcement that it is alive and done. Let yourself listen to that sound in your imagination. The gentle, constant, crackling song of the cooling bread. It is a sound of release, a sound of settling. Each tiny tick is a release of tension, a final, microscopic adjustment. It is one of the most peaceful and satisfying sounds in the world, a natural lullaby of the hearth. Edric begins the work of removing the loaves. He expertly slides the long wooden peel into the oven, navigating it between the loaves, and with a gentle nudge, he lifts one onto the blade. He draws it out of the darkness and into the light of the room, its singing growing just a little louder as the cool air envelops it completely. He carries it over to a set of long wooden racks, and with another gentle tilt of the peel, he deposits the hot, crackling loaf to cool. He repeats this movement with a steady, hypnotic rhythm. Slide, lift, carry, place. Slide, lift, carry, place. The sound of the hard, crisp crust of the bread scraping softly against the stone floor of the oven and the wooden peel is another layer in this soothing soundscape. It's a dry, rustling, abrasive sound, a sound of texture, of something solid and real. One by one, the hot, fragrant, singing loaves are rescued from the fiery darkness and arranged in rows on the cooling racks. The bakehouse is now filled to bursting with their heat and their incredible scent. The air is warm and thick with the smell of home, of sustenance, of a job well and truly done. The sight is one of rustic, imperfect beauty. No two loaves are exactly alike. Some are rounder, some more oval. Some have burst open more dramatically than others. They are all unique individuals, born of the same dough, but shaped by the chaotic, beautiful dance of heat and steam. Now that the bread is out of the oven, let's look at it more closely. Let's appreciate it not with our modern eyes, which search for lightness and uniformity, but with the eyes of the past. The crust is the most striking feature. It is incredibly thick and hard, a veritable armor. If you were to tap it with your knuckle, it would make a distinct, hollow thock-thock sound, like knocking on a wooden door. This thick crust was not a flaw, it was a feature. It was a natural preservative. In a world without plastic bags or bread bins, this hard shell would protect the softer crumb inside from mold and pests, keeping the bread edible for several days. It was a shield, a guarantee of future meals. And what of the inside, the crumb? If we were to cut a loaf open, we would not see a light, airy, open structure. This bread, made with coarsely ground whole grain flour, low in protein, and leavened with a wild sourdough culture, is dense. The crumb is tight, moist, and heavy. It is chewy, requiring a strong jaw and a determined effort to eat. This was not a delicate food. This was fuel. It was sustenance designed to fill the belly and provide the energy for a long day of hard physical labor. Each slice was a solid, substantial thing, meant to be eaten slowly, deliberately. The color would be a grayish-brown, flecked with the darker specks of bran, a mirror of the raw flour it came from. And of course there is the grit. As you chew a piece of this bread, you would feel it. Not with every bite, perhaps, but often enough to be a constant companion to the meal. It would be a faint, sandy crunch, the texture of stone against tooth. Over a lifetime of eating this bread every single day, this microscopic grit acted as a slow, relentless abrasive, wearing down the enamel of the teeth. Tooth decay and loss were common realities of medieval life, and this daily bread was a primary contributor. As you lie here safe and comfortable, just imagine that sensation in a detached, curious way. The dense chewiness, the deep, sour flavor, the occasional, surprising crunch of stone. It allows you to appreciate the softness of your own pillow, the quietness of your own room, and the gentle comfort that surrounds you now. The villagers who had been waiting outside, drawn by the smell, now begin to enter the bakehouse one by one. There is no noisy clamor. The process is orderly and calm. They come forward with their small payment, perhaps a few precious coins, or an agreement of barter, a portion of their own produce or labor. Edric, his face flushed from the heat of the oven, hands them their loaf. The bread is still warm, and they cradle it in their arms, a precious life-sustaining treasure. The exchange is simple, a quiet murmur of thanks, a nod of the head. It is a ritual of community, a daily affirmation of their interdependence. The baker has done his work, and now the village will eat. Finn watches this procession, a deep sense of weary satisfaction settling into his bones. His muscles ache from the lifting and the kneading. His lungs feel dusty from the flour and the smoke. But his work is complete. He has been a part of this ancient, essential alchemy. He has helped turn earth and water and fire into food. There is a profound peace in this feeling of completion, this knowledge of a vital task fulfilled. As the last villager departs with their bread, the bakehouse falls quiet once more. The energy of the morning's frantic work and the midday's tense waiting has dissipated, leaving behind a sleepy, warm calm. The racks of cooling bread continue their soft, crackling song, a final, fading whisper. The day's work is not quite over. There is still the final, winding down tasks. The cleaning. Finn takes the large wooden trough and begins to scrape out the residual pieces of dried dough from the morning's work. The sound of the metal scraper on the wood is a rhythmic, percussive noise. Scrape, scrape. It is a cleansing, resetting action. He scrubs the trough with water and a rough bundle of straw, washing away the memory of this day's batch to prepare it for the next. This act of cleaning, of resetting, is itself a deeply relaxing ritual. It is about creating order from chaos, about preparing for a fresh start. It is a signal to the mind that the cycle is complete and it is time for rest. Edric, meanwhile, tends to the most important thing of all, the leaven. He takes a small piece of the raw dough that he had set aside hours ago, before the loaves were shaped. This is the payment to the starter, the food that will sustain it for the next 24 hours. He stirs this fresh dough into the bubbling slurry in the ceramic crock. He is feeding the future. He is ensuring that when Finn arrives in the pre-dawn darkness tomorrow, the leaven will be alive and ready, the chain unbroken. He covers the crock once more with its damp cloth, tucking it away in its cool corner like a sleeping child. The cycle is complete, and yet it is already beginning again. This endless, predictable, gentle rhythm of life is the most reassuring thought of all. Finn sweeps the floor, his broom made of bundled twigs. The soft, whispery swoosh of the broom against the packed earth floor is a quiet, meditative sound. He gathers the stray flour dust, the bits of dried dough, the ash that escaped the pit. He is tidying the space, bringing it back to a state of rest. The bakehouse, which was a place of intense, fiery, and fragrant activity, is now becoming just a quiet, smoky hut once more. The last of the bread has stopped its singing. The loaves are now cool enough to handle, their crusts hard and silent. The day's bake is truly and finally over. Finn's work is done. He will receive a few loaves as his own payment, his share of the day's creation. He can now return to his family's hut, his body tired but his purpose fulfilled, ready for a meal and the deep, dreamless sleep of the weary. As we leave him to his well-earned rest, let the feeling of completion, of a cycle finished, wash over you. There is nothing more to do. The story of the bread is over. And your only task now is to follow Finn's example and allow yourself to drift into your own deep, peaceful rest.